And I think that on the one hand, it was good in the sense that the project that, I mean, there was a point where, for example, it was clear that was going to be over budget, and we're trying to figure out, do we try and scale it back, like literally make the thing smaller and more, far more modest in order to save some money. And the decision was, you know what, we got to push for this and try to get the money because it's going to be over budget no matter what. And people like emotionally, like people working on the biennial or people who are involved in that are going to know that it's over budget. But it should, if it's going to be over budget by whether it's over budget by like $20,000 or $100,000, they're going to still feel like it was over budget. It's going to produce the same kind of like reaction in them. But if it's $100,000 over and it's like amazing, then at least they can say it's over budget and it's amazing. And so we really fought for that. And I think that was, first of all, I think it was the right project to fight for. Like they used the $200,000 to its fullest, and it was incredible, and everybody agreed that it was. People who aren't architects, but it's also something that it's like normally you can't do that. Like there isn't $200,000 just to like go find, but in this case we had sponsors and like a lot of folks. The kind of like biggest people in the city were involved in this. I mean, the governor is behind this, and the chairman is a guy named Mike Fries, who's the head of Liberty Global. Liberty Global and Liberty Media are two. Liberty Global is the biggest cable provider in the world, like international cable, like international news cable provider. He's the CEO of that. So he himself, like, just personally has a ton of money, and between him and a handful of other people like that, there was a possibility of actually getting more. Although we had nothing to do with that. That wasn't our responsibility.
When did you start talking? Did everyone have the same amount of time? So when were the architects? How long did they develop the project? So
we had their so it opened in mid-July. We had their initial proposals in January. We brought them out to present those one in December and the other three in January of that year, last year. And we had the proposals. I mean, it varied. Like, as you saw, the petzos didn't really change the whole way through, and they had like construction documents. Like they had a huge, thick book of drawings, by March. Like, everything you needed to build it. June 14th project, for example, was like basically still being designed and fabricated in the days before it opened. So there were a lot of logistical problems with that. That one that had to be sorted out, and the project had to be redesigned a bunch of times, and it just wasn't that easy. So it kind of varied. I mean, obviously, the more time you can have, the better. But I would say it seemed like if doing the whole thing over again, if you could really lock down the designs, but know that all legal issues and everything was ironed out by maybe 3 months in advance, like 3 months in advance, that would be enough time. The actual construction, the fabrication of most of this did not take that long. I think the one that started earliest was Petzos, the tower, and they started off-site building. They built every level independently. Yeah, and then they built them as almost like trusses, kind of, but like all the outside were panels that and all of those slats were already like screwed onto the panels like off-site, and then all that was brought to the site and they were assembled into each platform, like each level, and then a crane just picked one up and put it on the top of the next. And so they started in early June, I think, working on that. That was the earliest that any of the construction started, though. Everybody else started, beginning in June or so it was a lot of it. Most of it was built in 6 weeks before it opened. I mean, that's also something though that it was for the art audience made this biennial different, because I think in like most architecture biennials do commission new work of some kind, but art biennials many times don't. Like they often are collecting work from around the world, and it's work that's already been produced for someone else someplace else. And so the idea of generating like new work for a biennial to the art side of the the audience, that was kind of a new thing, and I that was interesting, I think, to me.
The experience, I mean, the number for issues and for installations versus 10 or 12, once the budget has been blown up. I mean, like, how do you think about that now? Like, I mean, what is more effective for what? Like, I mean, how do you choose about like quantity and spread when it comes to urbanism in the city? It's a kind of a territory to work with versus a concentration of effort into one single piece, into a piece that has to be concentrating on the discussion. I mean, like, how do you deal with that kind of like?
I mean, on the one hand, I think just
100,000 means 10 more teams that would have done 10 installations all over Denver.
Yeah. Yeah, and had we had that budget at the beginning, and that much to work with at the beginning, I think we would have probably done more projects.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think like I mean, the experience now having done one, and like you have not.
But I mean, first of all, just kind of, I guess intuitively, it seems like 2 would be a weird number to have.
Yeah.
1 would work, and 3 or more would work. But I think also I would probably base it more on funding than on anything else, because it sort of seems like, having gone through it this time, it seems like the minimum that you would need, you would need a minimum, I think, of $25,000-$30,000 to do something substantial, like for a city. I mean, like if you're really trying to like engage the city.
The art one and the architecture one, and more when it comes to urbanism as a kind of a theme of research.
Yeah.
How do you deal with urbanism as a kind of a strategy towards the city as a whole versus urbanism as a kind of a strategic?
Yeah. Well, so in this case, we picked these kind of typical problems, like how do you cross a boundary, that's separating downtown from like another vibrant area. How do you deal with this, like all of the surface parking lots, add surface parking lots? How do you deal with the mall, which is just like it's a mile long, so there's it's different places. But that's what we did there. But I think you could also do, for sure, you could have like more disseminated projects, where they're not like they don't end up being individual pavilions, but would be more like something through the fabric of the city. I think would have been possible also.
Yeah, and in that context, did you think about like when you go through the discussion about like the temporality of that? I mean, like why do they have to be dismantled or so they can remain in the city?
Yeah. Now looking back, I think they could have. Like if it was a couple just slight changes, which may not even cost anymore. I think some like Petsos, for example. If we had just built a foundation for that, it would still be there. Like honestly, it would like, people really liked it. The only reason it came down was because it was going to be structurally
problematic.
Yeah, like we just couldn't. We didn't know for sure that it could. Once the ground started freezing thaw, we thought it would heave and like there could be some instability. But otherwise, it would still be there. And honestly, if we had from the beginning decided that was going to be the case, building a foundation for it would have been no more expensive than building those outriggers and like everything else. I mean, it could have definitely stayed.
Yeah, no, I was thinking also like not so much logistically, also like conceptually, what would be the difference? Like the role of the biennial against the city or for the city versus.
I mean, the only thing I would worry about with that is like in the case of that project, is it's like it could in the end have the opposite effect of what was intended. In other words, once you built a foundation and it had been there for a couple of years, if people really liked it a lot, I would worry that it was supposed to be there as a kind of placeholder for a building that would come later that people would go to visit. Like if it was, like the idea was that if you developed that median as a district, then you would no longer have the gap between the two sides. And it as a kind of temporary test or placeholder of that, it would be better as a year or 2 year long thing, but there's a chance because it got such a positive reaction that eventually people would fight against taking it down, and then all of a sudden like you couldn't do what it was like promoting long term.
I was thinking more in the kind of the context of the conventions of other pavilions, like the Fair Pavilion, like East Pavilion, and so on. They were thought to be temporary, but then even they were to come, and after a while the city was asking to rebuild it. It was such a successful thing that suddenly it became like a patrimony for to be stable.
I think in this case it worked out really well because it was torn down and it did a good job of like creating an appetite for doing something there.
Exactly.
But I don't know that it was loved enough to be reconstructed. It's
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just, you know, the testing mode that it has, but we have the ambition also to be staying somehow, even if it's not in the first round, but in the second round.
yeah.
Or to change the way that the city looks at those kind of works is kind of more ambition.
Yeah.
Because
Well, definitely.
there's the potential for
So,
that, you know.
so we had follow-up presentations and meetings. So, for example, the city planner. You know, I was on a panel with him, and there are a lot of people. So, I'll give you two examples. The city planner thinks this is a great idea, and is now trying to figure out how to promote that through, you know, the legal channels that he has. There's also a developer in the area, a big developer, but pretty progressive one, who I talked to him and said that for him it's just so obvious now that that's what needs to be done there, and he's now, you know, if this ever becomes possible, I'm sure he will jump in there and be one of the first to do something. So I think it did have
impact.
Yeah, I think it did have an impact on it. It did sort of set the table for a development, like a good strategy for development for the future. You know, for sure, as the conversation goes forward about what to do about, you know, that boulevard, and you know, it's definitely going to be one of the options that's considered. You know, if not the option. So.
Okay. Jumbo, go on.
Right. So some of the questions we don't need to ask because they've already obviously been addressed. But I think one of the important ones is is there a benefit in conducting a Biennale as a survey of architecture art and the performance art all at once, as done with the Biennale of the Americans, or does architecture have more to gain by remaining autonomous?
I don't know.
Thanks.
Well, it's tough because I think autonomy makes it. It's kind of what you would expect in a way. Autonomy would make it probably more. It's easier to be, you know, to push the boundaries of architecture if it's more autonomous. Probably. I don't know. Maybe I should like to be more clear. I think autonomy in the curation would make it easier to push more boundaries. Otherwise, in every other way, I think it's really a huge benefit for it to be, you know, kind of sort of multi-platform biennial, because I mean, first of all, it's like just this money thing. You know, I mean, there's no. To me, I was absolutely like flabbergasted. And we got to a point where we were starting to get bids from people to make that pavilion, and they were coming back so high. And I was thinking, you know, we're going to start working on redesigning this, and like, you know, talking to some other, like, seeing who else can do the construction. And the administration, you know, the staff of the biennial was saying, like, no, like, we want to talk to development, see if we can get the money, or whatever. And then they got the money, and it was kind of like, you know, in architecture, at least, you know, this kind of architecture, like, that never happens. It's just, you know, seems to me. I'm looking at you because you go through this, I'm assuming, like, quite often, and my experience, like, that just never happens, you know. I think that only happened because it was, you know, there was a whole other audience that was kind of, you know, a whole other like group of participants for whom $200,000 is not that much money that were involved in. So even just like on that level, I think it was important. But I also think it was important because in this case, you know, if we are trying to have some kind of impact on the city, we can't just kind of like do that and have other architects look and say, oh, that's a great idea. I mean, you have to somehow communicate what you're, you know, these ideas or these experiments to like, people in city government, people in the, you know, developers, other local business leaders. I mean, it's got to be kind of, you have to have a broader audience if you want to have an effect, because those people are driving a lot of the changes that are taking place in the city. So I think from that standpoint, it was really good. There was not as much crossover kind of in terms of discourse as there could be, and I think that's one thing that maybe in future editions it might try to be planned better. Like for example, it would have been extremely interesting to have Mark Lee or Michael Webb in one of the symposia that I mentioned. Because because they would just throw, they would be able to throw a monkey wrench into it. I think it would be really a good thing. Not that those weren't really productive, but I think they would, they're very intelligent people. Like it's just, as kind of intelligent and charismatic as, any of the other people that they invited. And, like Michael Webb and Ariana Huffington should talk to each other, I mean, I think that would be a really a good thing. For the biennial and also for architecture, I think that there could have been more crossover in the programming, probably.
I have a question that's kind of separate from what we had, but how does the whole funding process work? Like, how do you get sponsors to kind of support what you guys are doing? Right?
Yeah. So it's nothing really so sophisticated. It's like they assemble a good, so first of all, this particular biennial is really being pushed by our governor. And the governor obviously is somebody who has a lot of connections. So once the governor started to push it, then they he has got a director for the first one, and they put together a board of directors. And that's really a hugely important part of that, because the composition of that board of directors is going to give you, some connections to funding, but also connections to good ideas. So not everybody on the board is on the board because they can get you money. Like a lot of people are on the board because, they're going to be the ones who are going to really shape this and make it into something, really successful and interesting. But then, it's a kind of like tree in a way that goes out from there. So like the people in the board of directors, they're going to talk to people they know, and it's really, there's pressure on them to promote it. And the more people that become involved and whose, sort of names are on it in some way, like the more momentum it gets in all ways, like publicity, funding, everything. But there was this biennial had a staff of, 15 people. It maybe went up a little bit from that during the opening week when they had other people, they brought in more people to do more things. But they had people who were just in charge of organizing volunteers, people who were, they were just on the arts and architecture side. There were, maybe 3 people who were only working on the programming part of that, not the fundraising or anything. They had a whole development team that was just doing fundraising. So.
What happens between different kind of iterations, right? 2013, next one 2016.
Yeah. 15. They're doing 15.
Okay. But are they working on that, or they stop?
Yeah. So I didn't think to do this in advance, but I just called, or I emailed yesterday morning. I emailed the woman who's the director of it now, and just to ask her what's going on in the next one, because I figured you guys would want to know, and I actually don't know because I haven't talked to them in a couple of months. But they already had and she called me. I think there is news. I just haven't had a chance to talk to her yet, so I don't know what it is. But they'll appoint a new curator soon. I don't know what they're going to do with the administration, because actually I think there were a lot of things that had to do with the structure of the management of the whole thing that I think caused some problems. Mm-hmm. And
so there is a part of these are non-stop working.
Yeah, because then also, actually, not just on the kind of planning of the next one, but then they're also now going to have events in Mexico next summer. So in between the biennials, they're planning other events that are not in Denver and organizing those too. So.
Do you know what the total budget is for the Biennale?
I don't. I can find that out.
Is it a separate 501c3? Like, is it a
Yes.
separate nonprofit?
Yes. I know the whole total budget. The total budget for the architecture project, which is going to be small compared to the other side, but the total budget for the architecture projects initially was $250,000. I think in the end, what we spent was probably close to 5, probably. And then the art, like the art, there was a biennial exhibition, art exhibition, and then the urban sort of installation part of that. I think the total for that is probably about $200,000 also. But then the other side of it, the idea side, I'm sure they had several million. and because it repeats, you know, they go back to the well. You know, like if it's good and people are behind it, then you know, the same sponsors are going to return over and over again. And some of those are corporate sponsors. A lot of them are corporate sponsors or foundations. You know, that'll contribute to. I mean, it's not all just individuals. There were a few individuals, but I think getting some significant money, but most of it came from foundations. I mean, then there, it's like because it had political support from both the city and state governments. Then, I think there are other places where you can kind of save money too. Obviously, like all the permits and everything that we had to get for any of these things. We didn't pay for any of those because the city just didn't charge us for that, or yeah, they support it. So.
Another question would be, so the one that you showed, the Biennale of America, it had a mixture of art and architecture and festival, with like the beer garden and the music for animals festival. Do you think that those are new types of directions that Biennales are going to take, or was that like a once, like with that those festival types things?
Like this biennial, like will they do it again?
Do you think they do things like that again? Or
yeah, I think they will. Okay. Yeah, it was pretty successful. I mean, getting 20,000 people out to basically watch a bunch of like contemporary art performances is like no small feat. Yeah. I think that's no joke. Like that's a huge audience for contemporary art. So. The contemporary art community for sure is going to, keep pushing for that. But I think the biennial, staff and leaders, like they all saw the value of that. Yeah. I mean, I personally think that I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know that I would get as involved in those kinds of things in the future. Because I think that if I were involved again, I think I would want to push the architecture part of it a little more and be a little more precise about how we do it and focus it a little, in maybe a slightly different way, and then and organize the curation of it maybe differently a little bit too, and not really be so involved in other parts of it. It was fun to do that, and like for me, it's a benefit because of the other people who are involved. So, I mean, you lose money like crazy when doing something like that. Like, I mean, we got paid like peanuts to do a huge amount of work for that biennial, but the value is more in the kind of how you expand your network, the new people that you meet, like the potential for other things that come out of that later, and also the chance to contribute, something to your city. So while initially I was sort of less interested in it in terms of like the way that the architecture could propose new solutions to these like kind of urban problems in Denver, because I tend to like kind of shy away from thinking of architecture as a problem-solving, discipline, and think of it more as a kind of possibility creating discipline. Or it ended up becoming that, and I think actually it's a lot of things that we did really could be good for the city. Like there's some things that they could learn from it that could be fairly progressive and could lead to some pretty interesting things in Denver. So.
More questions for Bob?
The last one would be, through your works with various biennials, how have you witnessed format change, and what would you see the biennial becoming because of this?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't been a part of that many of them, but the few that I have been a part of are so different from one another. It seems like each biennial develops its own identity, its own mix of programming, and its own. I mean, they have different ambitions, like totally different ambitions. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I guess the only answer would be that maybe it'll keep expanding as a type of exhibition and event. Maybe we'll see more variety over time. Like,
what is the interest for the Americas coming from?
Oh, so this is sorry, I didn't mention that. That's really important. So the So
Because it's one of the issues.
the logic that, so this is, so the reason why the governor is sort of caught, Hickenlooper is his name, John Hickenlooper, the reason why he originally organized is really like behind this is that if you look at, he perceives a gap between the kind of like on the ground importance of the United States relationships with other countries in North and South America, like a gap between that and the amount of kind of popular discourse that there is about our relationship with various parts of the world. In other words, we tend to really think in terms of our relationship to Europe, our relationship to Asia. We don't think about our relationship to South America or Canada, but statistically, like more of our oil comes from Canada than from any other, foreign country or region, more than the Middle East even. So, and we get a lot from South America. Like we have a tremendous amount of economic activity is actually aligned on that north-south axis, and so.
But in the case of, is because of Denver, or you're talking about the United States?
Well, so his goal is to make Denver a kind of like central place, like a place where that discourse can be generated, and to make Denver an important place to neighbors to the to the north and south, so that those ties between businesses and between politicians can become a lot stronger, starting in Denver and and with the biennial. So I mean, in addition to all the people I mentioned were involved, they're also like the ambassador to Mexico has been heavily involved in both of the biennials.
Yeah,
and,
so
and they're like mayors and former presidents of South American countries are always involved, and so there's a huge part of this was about the Panama Canal and the whole redevelopment plan for the Panama Canal. And they took a contingent of biennial, whatever people down to Panama to see it and to meet with the commission down there, and so it's like. It's definitely not just like for fun. Like they're trying to kind of create connections, like
it seems that is one of the
political and business connections to the to Central America, South America, Canada, and Mexico.
How do you think that ambition influences the exhibitions themselves? Because with the 4 commissions, that seems to be dealing with very local. That seems kind of divorced from the ambition of the overall.
Right, because they were dealing with like local problems in Denver. Yeah, I think that's actually to me that's one of the problems with how we curated this last time. I mean, that was something we inherited, like those 4 problems and the like finding people and developing installations for those 4 sites was not something we had any like say in as curators. But if I were involved again, I think I would push for something that I mean, there are people who would answer your question and say something like, point to like the skyline cloud, like, oh, well, what we're doing is we're learning from these guys in Medellin how important shade is and how that should be like a factor in designing urban environments. I think it's a little bit of a reach, to be honest. I think there could be, I'm not exactly sure how yet, but I think that somehow developing like a stronger sense of not trying to kind of say like architecture is the same throughout all the Americas or anything, but trying to highlight very particular practices in the Americas and give them a kind of platform for like promoting what they're doing and how that's different because of where they live. I think that would be really good. I mean, it's also a strange thing because I think right now architecture is becoming like way more localized than it ever has. Like I think it's we don't have a kind of like consolidated movement anymore, and I think that part of that is then like these local cultures of architecture are developing that are sort of less concerned with kind of like broader international issues.
Yeah,
but then
at
the same time, this biennial is trying to actually like build that. That
I mean, it seems
network,
like
so.
it would be a great opportunity to have architecture and other cultural like art, etc., at the table when you're looking at the Panama Zone.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, it seems like you already have topics, or there are already topics maybe built into the kind of the highest level ambition of the project that I guess I would think of as architectural opportunities problems.
Yeah, that's true.
So it seems like in a way that
why you didn't have any local guests? Because you were like Chilean, Benzo, Gaspar, you was local, no? But like in terms of installation, nobody from Denver was working.
Yeah.
Architect.
Well, mainly that's because the culture for architecture is pretty weak in Denver. So first of all, there aren't a lot of people who I think would be good.
It was just like a logistical thing. No, I was
Partly.
not sure about the role of
Partly that.
bringing people from outside into Denver,
Yeah.
or like thinking about like Denver, thinking of Panama. I mean, like how would you?
No, it's partly that that I don't personally I just don't think there are that many people who would do a really good job. But also partly that you know, well, or another way of seeing that is I think it's really actually important to be an ambassador. For me, it's important to be an ambassador of architecture to Denver. You know, to really try to kind of like, you know, introduce people.
I was more in the
concepts.
context of the person of the Americans. Like, I mean, what will be the vector between the host and the team in a way, and how this is interacting with the content and the strategy, which I think is a challenging, you know, scenario for how to create that.
Yeah.
Without like bringing everybody from outside in, thinking about them, everybody from outside, or like thinking about the vectors of exchange, and everybody's thinking about locally. I mean, those are very different strategies. You know, like,
Yeah. And it would be interesting, like that would be another, a very different version of it would be rather than, you know, looking at specific local problems of Denver and building those buildings, looking at other, you know, finding a set of projects in the Americas that are kind of key projects of some kind, and then like developing proposals for those or something like that. Like, you know, unbuilt, but ones that would maybe be more meaningful to the other people who are there, you know, to the other guests that are coming. So like, so if you have somebody from the, you know, somebody who's like, you know, working on the Panama Canal there, but then they can also be on a panel with architects and see what their proposals are. Yeah, I don't know, it seems like that would be, and you could do what they're trying to do on the other side, which is actually like develop like business.
I think it's also, I mean, I think that it's an interesting issue about how you do make something like meaningful on the ground locally and then speak to a broader audience. I don't know if there's a way to make a local problem a universal problem.
Right.
I mean, maybe in some ways that's what you were speaking to, that they would say, well, we're learning from middlemen by shape, et cetera. But I don't know, I think that that's also like a challenge. It's like, how do you, because in a way that they're kind of two radically different things, right? It's either totally local or it's completely foreign, and then
yeah, I was thinking more about like, but like not like these things that the governor seems to be like. I mean, I'm sure that the governor is not so worried about Panama, but he's much more worried about how Mexican communities like developing Denver as a community as well. So like how the vectors of landing or transferring between in and out, import, export in Denver and the Americas could be a way of thinking locally, but you know, in a global context. I mean, so it's not like just choosing only like the roundabout of Denver or the Panama Canal, but to your like specific conflicts that are created by the exchange, whatever it is, infrastructural, like social, neighborhood-based. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking about like, I mean, the exchange between the two territories or the two kind of scales.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of open to more questions if you have time. You have time?
I think I have to go right now. Sorry. Great to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you too, yeah.
Hope to see you around.
Yeah. Likewise. Likewise. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for the invitation.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Yeah. No problem. Yeah, yours so much.
That's fine. That's yours. So, okay, we kind of like still a few more minutes with Paul, so we want to just keep on with questions you may have. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
There's just one question. What types of decisions are most critical to the process of developing exhibitions and reaching out to the public to create awareness?
To create awareness. I don't know. I think there's two, like, you can answer that question two ways. One is, I think for architects, like, going into this world, it's important to like, really figure out, like, what is the message that you're trying to send, what question that you're trying to ask with an exhibition, something like that. And then, can you present that clearly enough that other people are going to understand it quickly and be interested in it? So, because the truth is, like, you know, the kind of discussions that we have, like, in schools, I mean, they're super important for our discipline and, like, really interesting, but you can't. It's a different audience. Like, the public is a different audience, and you can't really, like, talk to them in the same way or present ideas in the same way. And that's really a difficult transition to make from, you know, kind of intellectual way of dealing with things to something else, whatever it is. And so, I mean, I'm kind of, like, I guess, reiterating the importance of your question in that answer, but but you have to, like, kind of plan for that now. Like, for example, when I work with Adam from the MCA, Adam Lerner, one of the things that he's most interested in is the boundary between high culture and low culture, let's say, or pop culture, and interested in how you can either blur that line or combine the two. And there are plenty of people in the art world who are doing that right now, and that's not a unique thing. But I think, to be honest, he's one of the best at it, because he's been doing it for a long time now, and like, the MCA and Adam are very good at not, like, kind of, like, dumbing down, you know, like the art, but also making it something like kind of fun and accessible for people. So I'll give you an example. Like, when we had the opening for Energy Effects, you know, it was a pretty complex, like, kind of topic, you know, energy and how to use in the arts, whatever. The opening itself had all kinds of stuff that was just kind of, like, fun. Like, there was a guerrilla marching band showed up at one point. I was going to show, I don't think I have a wireless connection here, but there's if you look up, like, Energy Effects, MCA Denver, or something like that, a YouTube video will come up about the opening. You'll see there was this huge turnout, and all these different, like, weird groups showed up, like the Denver Cruisers, which is this group that, like, they dress up in a different costume every week and then ride around the city on bicycles at night. But it's like 300 people or something like that. So, you know, they showed up and did this thing that they called, like, the ring of hell or something like that, where they basically start, like, riding in a circle around a group of people, and the people can't get out, you know, so you just have to wait until they're done, and then, you know, and then eventually they leave. Or there was a, you know, guerrilla marching band, or there was this these performance artists that have these, like, robots with propane tanks that, like, make all these explosions and have, like, you know, these, like, battles. And so there's all this kind of stuff going on. Now that's, like, really, but no, like, at no point. A couple of those things were planned, a couple of them weren't, but at no point did anybody from MCA try to over-intellectualize that and make it art, on the one hand. So then the art, you know, that was being exhibited, you know, kept its kind of, like, high level of sophistication, you know, and didn't get kind of dumped down. But on the other hand, I think Adam's really interested in the fact that, you know, like, art can be, you know, like, art is or the museum itself, the institution is typically, I mean, it's like, when you think about it, like museums are among the most, like, neutral and conservative places that we have, because they're incredibly passive, right? Like, they try to, like, stay totally out of the way, present the art, let the art be, you know, creative, imaginative, whatever. But the museum itself, the institution, the building, whatever, is usually very passive. And he believes that it could be more active, like that the museums can, you know, so when we bring in, like, a rocket engine, which is not by no means, like, an accepted piece of contemporary art, and put it next to, like, something that is an accepted piece of contemporary art, you know, we think very carefully about that, but the whole purpose of that is to, you know, kind of get people on some level to question, like, you know, what is art, and maybe in looking at those two things together, to it creates some new like idea for them. And if that's the role of art, then that thing becomes art. Like it is art then at that moment. So I think I don't know. It's sort of a long answer to your question, but I think it's to me it's like the answer is the most critical thing is trying to figure out some strategies for making it accessible and fun and interesting for a broad audience while not kind of stripping any work of its its disciplinary significance.
Do you have any more questions?
I have one question. And it's kind of led from what you were just talking about, like in like a bigger sense, what like as like us as students outside of investigating for this class, like what are some of the most fruitful things to take away from all the progress and work that you've done that possibly could be applied to other things outside of Biennales?
As architects, I mean.
Yeah, like as to like for us,
Architectural students,
what's something
what
that
do
we
you learn
could
from doing that?
learn from it that we wouldn't even, let's say.
That's a heavy-duty question. My advice, just from the first, 5 years of the office, almost 5 years, is something that's worked well for us. Let me put it that. I don't know if it's advice. You can take it for whatever it's worth. But something that's worked well for us in my office is being promiscuous about the types of projects that we do, but very particular about the types of clients that we work with. So we'll design like almost anything that anybody like brings to us as a project, as long as the client is like open-minded and we feel like they're it's a good fit. It's not like I'm sitting in the office, by the way, and people are calling every 10 minutes and I'm saying like, nah, that's not interesting, we're not doing that, but I have turned down some projects, and like some big projects actually, that would have produced a huge amount of like revenue for the office and allowed us even to do other things, but not done them specifically because I think it's been important to really carefully kind of like monitor and select, what we're doing and select projects that fit that, and that are going to help us advance our interests as an office. And so curating or writing or designing buildings, designing installations, or, whatever, all that stuff. I mean, it's might look like we're really kind of like willing to do anything because we do all those different types of projects, but we're actually really, I try to be very, very particular about who we work with and make sure that if there's a possibility of it being really high level with literally every project. The only projects we've taken have been a couple of small house additions that we've done that are either for friends or for somebody who we believe is an important person for us to know and to have them support us to help get other work. And when I say small number, it's been like 2 or 3, and only one of those didn't have some like redeemable qualities in terms of like the work. I mean, and all 3 of them have been useful because we're it's early, like it's the first couple of years, and part of it is we're just learning how does construction go. But yeah, I'd say there's only of the many projects that we've taken on, there's only been maybe 1 or 2 that I would say we did purely for kind of like as a personal favor to someone else who didn't really, design-wise, it didn't contribute something to our thinking.
Questions?
I kind of have a question about is Denver, the Biennale in Denver, you combine it with ideas, and there are business people there, and there are all sorts of people there. In Chicago, during the Chicago Ideas Week, they kind of connect that with the open house week, go see the building. Do you feel like, since we're supposed to be in this class kind of thinking about Chicago Biennale, do you think connecting what we're trying to do and connecting that with Chicago, was that fruitful for you guys? I mean, was that like a good combination?
I mean, it's kind of in a way what we were talking about before. It's a good idea. I don't think it's really, it hasn't borne fruit yet, really. I mean, there have been some, I mean, it has in the sense of what I was talking about. Like we get maybe a little more funding and we get a little more support, you know, because we're paired with, you know, the ideas platform. But in terms of like advancing architecture, like either in the Americas or, you know, just as a discipline, or in Denver even really, I don't think it's really, like, it hasn't really had an impact yet, but it seems like it should. I mean, it seems like that's more a problem of not thinking through or strategizing that relationship well than it is like, well, there's just nothing, you know, nothing to accomplish there. I mean, I think it's just, we just, you know, I mean, to be totally honest, like if I'm involved in the next one, it would be, getting picking my nose on camera. If I'm, yeah, nice. If I were to do it again, I would want to be involved on a higher level because I think that there were some strategic problems, some things that had to do with like kind of the management structure and you know who had sort of who's making what decisions. I mean, it was nothing that I would blame any person for. It's just, and it's probably pretty typical. I mean, this is the first two versions of this. I mean, it takes a few to really get things like you know smooth and you know intelligently planned and everything like that. But I would probably want to be more involved on that level, just because it's early and it just seems like you could help to avoid some problems and like you know, make more progress. And I don't want to be frustrated like by going through it and having to kind of like deal with those things. But I mean, so I think that it will be a benefit. I mean, it's also something that, at least from an architectural standpoint, makes it unique. You know, you don't, you know, most times when you do work in an architecture biennial, you don't have those connections to those other people. And so I do want to find ways to exploit that better. I mean, for Chicago, I don't know. You know, I mean, that's part of the reason that works really well in Denver is because Denver's a really, really open city. Like, I know the governor, he knows me. I mean, I'm like a guy who's had a practice for 4.5 years or whatever. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It shouldn't, you know, it doesn't happen in a lot of places. But it does happen there. So like, so the local community, whether it's, you know, kind of business people, people in the arts, people in architecture, and they're all like sort of knowing we're starting to get to know each other if they don't already know each other, and you know, work together on other things besides the biennial. And so, you know, it's a very open political and business world there, and so it's possible. I don't know that it's possible. I don't know Chicago that well, but it might be more difficult in Chicago for that reason to do something like that. But then again, maybe not. I mean, some of the people, like for example, there's another thing that I'm involved in Denver. So the governor has started this thing called the Colorado Innovation Network, and the purpose of that is to bring, really in the end, I think it's like bring companies to Colorado. And Boulder has a big startup community now, like a huge startup community, and like outside Silicon Valley, it's probably one of the most prolific. And there are like a couple big companies, like really big Fortune 500 companies have moved their headquarters to Colorado in the last few years or whatever. Anyway, you know, I've been on this innovation network with people like from Chicago, for example, who are super interesting people working at Kellogg or, you know, like at Northwestern, the business school, or working, you know, different like startups or smaller kind of incubators and things like that in Chicago. They're super, super interesting. I mean, that's not the community that's really involved in the biennial. The biennial tend to be like the bigger corporate people for the most part. But, you know, I would imagine there would be some really like smart, interesting people outside of architecture in Chicago who are more kind of progressive, like maybe out of the startup community or, you know, that sort of, that kind of business.
Yeah, and we're like emphasizing a lot about like logistics and the politics, like the actual politics of things. So maybe, what would be your thoughts about the kind of the interdisciplinary impact in Denver? Like, for example, like, is the university that involved into the biennial, or do you expect the biennial to have an effect on the actual community of architects and how they understand their discipline, or how they expand their own kind of understanding of it and so on?
Yeah, in the short term, I don't expect it to have much of an influence because almost
the question of audience as well.
Yeah, I mean, all of the, I think it would have a better chance, the biennial in Denver would have a better chance of influencing like an international group of architects than it would the local architects. The predominant type of office in Denver is very corporate. Like even the small offices, their main priority is growing the office and getting bigger projects, more projects. They're not really interested in their relationship. They're not interested in disciplinary issues, really. Like, they don't care whether they have an influence on the discipline. They're not looking to learn things from other architects. Like unless it has to do with like how to build their business.
No, but I mean, but once you understand the biennial, no, you like, I mean, the community understands the biennial as kind of an event that has to do with actual, real politics and real corporates when it comes to the biennial itself. I mean, those people that are interested in corporate architecture should be interested in the biennial as well, to be linked to those.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like maybe by default they will be interested, but because of a kind of a business opportunity to be involved with.
Oh yeah.
Will be a possibility of.
Yeah, and I would like actively like resist that happening because I think that this is a kind of like open opportunity. It's not fully formed yet, and there's a chance that this could become like a program that really does, contribute something to the broader discipline, which is, my goal through my office is to try to do that as much as possible. Try to open up new possibilities for architecture, and I think this could do that. So I will campaign for that as much as I can, and try to resist having. But yeah, they would.
I mean, there's a natural shift towards kind of commercial affairs. If you run the risk of that.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think it's going to happen anyway, because I think that also in the arts community, there's not a lot of support for that, and I think that the figureheads of the arts community in Denver would not be comfortable with that happening in the architecture part either. Like they wouldn't want to see that, go that direction. And I think also like even the governor, like even and the people who are really running like the larger biennial are. I don't think they would be that interested in that either. I think they understand that the real value of this is not just like networking, like trading business cards, but that it's the ideas. I mean, that's why they're doing like the white papers and these clinicas and everything. It's like I think they want like knowledge and kind of proposals for what to do in different sectors of the economy or whatever, or different like they understand that having like a lot of having like progressive people like behind that is going to eventually like make business great, but it's an indirect thing, and I think they know that, so I don't think they're trying to. And unfortunately, I don't think this is like the kind of thing where some really good architects come in and do some amazing work, and then the local community starts to think like, oh wow,
no.
There's like a whole other world out there, and I should know more about this thing and that thing. It's just not in them.
No, I was thinking about like the discussionary audience, like how do you set up the targets and what is the role of the effort of the mediums to be able to be operative with that audience. That you are like not only like targeting but also building a new kind of audience.
Yeah.
How do you shape that? Because it's like a completely self-aware and conscious strategy, and that requires that all the agents have a specific role in that discussion.
Yeah, and it's really hard, and related to your question, and it's like, one of the things I learned in the last one is that like, the way Carson works, for example, and what he did with the art side is he came up with like one concept, which is a pretty simple and not even really, in my opinion, that new of a concept, and he just like pushed that, and like there wasn't a lot of like deep sophistication, in my opinion, to what he did, but he knew that one concept would be interesting to the press, and even in the art world press would be interested in that. Like, there's one clear story, and it was like about art being, you know, kind of disseminated through the city rather than in the gallery, and people ate it up. You know, like, people really, really loved that. They thought it was incredible, like great idea. The actual art, you know, I mean, you didn't even see it. Like, even in the publications, it was, you know, interviews and like topics and discussion of this idea, but you didn't even see the actual art. And to me, the idea was even like a little bit stale. I mean, not like anything can be, you know, done, you know, in a smart way, but you know, I saw that, and like he was very successful in that. That's kind of like a problem. Is that if your audience, like what we did with the architecture, could be sophisticated for a local audience who understands the nature of these urban problems that we kind of took on. But really, the audience we were trying to address was a more of an international audience, and you know, if they don't really understand these local problems, and the program for the whole for the architecture projects has to be retooled, because then you're not dealing with an issue they care about. You know, it's just like you have to find something new.
One last question. Any more? We're good? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
I think you guys said
Great.
thank you very much.
Great.